There's a piece of land about 2 hours from here. 160 acres of Midwest farmland that everyone said was worthless. Not worth saving, not worth the effort, not worth the investment. The banks wouldn't touch it. The real estate agents wouldn't list it. Even the neighbours had written it off. They called it dead scrub, dead soil, a lost cause. But what they didn't know was that this land wasn't dead. It was just sleeping. And one old farmer was about to wake it up. Here's the thing about American farmland. We've got millions of acres of it, but not all of it is created equal. Some soil is black and rich and deep, the kind that's been farmed for generations. Other soil, it's rocky, it's compacted, it doesn't drain right, is marginalized, written off, and when banks look at it, when real estate agents measure it, when soil scientists test it, they see numbers, poor numbers, unprofitable numbers. They see a financial liability. What they don't see, what almost nobody sees anymore, is the story. Eleanor grew up around agriculture, but she'd spent 20 years doing something else. She'd moved to the city, built a career, lived a different life. But something was calling her back, a desire to do something with her hands, to work with land, to farm actually. Not the industrial kind, the intentional kind, the kind where you understand what you're putting in the ground and what you hope to harvest. She saw this farm listed online, 160 acres, $8,000 an acre because the soil quality was poor, a total of, well, more money than she had. But something about it intrigued her. She got it appraised. The appraiser walked the property for 45 minutes, took soil samples. I looked at county records. Then he gave her the verdict. The drainage is inadequate. The soil compaction is severe. There are significant limitations for crop production. This land is marginal at best, high risk. I wouldn't recommend purchasing. That's what the experts said. The people whose job it is to know land, to understand soil, to predict viability. And they were probably right. Based on what they were measuring, based on modern agricultural standards, based on current market conditions. But they were missing something that nobody had bothered to look for in about 70 years. Eleanor drove past the farm one more time before giving up. She pulled over, got out, just stood there looking at it, and that's when something in her mind clicked. How does land go from being good to being worthless? Does soil just die? Or does something else happen? She pulled out her phone, called the only person she knew who might have answers. An old man named James, someone whose family had roots in this community, someone who might remember. James didn't answer the phone at first. He was in his barn, a place where he spent most of his time now in retirement, not really doing anything, just being there. The barn had been in his family since 1919. His grandfather had built it, worked the land around it, improved it, documented it, cared for it in ways that modern agriculture had forgotten. James had only come across some of his grandfather's papers a few months before, old journals, account books, maps. When Eleanor called and asked about that property, the one everyone was calling worthless, it triggered something in my mind. I said, "Wait, that sounds like I think I have something. I'm not sure what it is, but I think I have something." James went to his barn, the same barn his grandfather built. He climbed into the attic, opened a cedar trunk that hadn't been disturbed in maybe 50 years. Inside were photographs, old journals, letters, account books, farming records, all of it preserved in that dry, cool space. He sorted through the items carefully, and then he found them. Maps. Official USGS survey maps from 1923. The kind that surveyors use to walk the property, measure the land, document everything they found. Most families throw these away. They're not exciting. They're just technical documents. But James knew better, because he recognized the handwriting in the margins, his grandfather's handwriting. And his grandfather hadn't just preserved the maps, he'd annotated them. Tile drainage installed 1921. That's his grandfather's note. Native prairie soil, deep humus layer. Another note. Water table, 18 inches. Drained section, excellent for corn. North 40, rotated to clover, maintains soil structure. His grandfather wasn't just farming, he was documenting, he was learning. He was studying his own land like a scientist would study it. When James called Eleanor back, his voice was different. Not excited exactly, more like confirmed, like something he'd always suspected had just been proven. "I found something," he said. "I found something from my grandfather. From 1923, from this land. You need to see this." Eleanor walked in and saw the maps spread across an old wooden table, sunlight coming through the barn windows, dust motes floating in the light. The maps were yellowed with age, but the ink was clear. The handwriting was precise. And what Eleanor realised in that moment was simple, but profound. This wasn't a modern land problem. This was a historical investigation. This was a mystery that had been waiting 70 years to be solved. "These are from 1923? she asked. James nodded. "That means this farm was documented, professionally measured, and your grandfather added notes. He knew what he had. He understood this land." What they didn't know yet was just how significant those maps were, or what they would reveal about this land's true history, or why modern agriculture had gotten everything wrong. But they knew one thing for certain. Those maps held answers. And answers were exactly what this land, and Eleanor, needed. They decided to bring in an expert. Someone who could decode the maps, someone who could tell them what those 1923 notations actually meant. Someone who could help them understand what had changed, and why. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 23 years studying Midwest soil. Her office at the County Agricultural Extension was filled with soil samples, maps, data sets, research papers. When Eleanor and James brought her the 1923 USGS maps, along with James's grandfather's handwritten notations, she had a reaction that surprised them both. These are actually quite rare. Most families don't keep survey maps, and fewer still have the surveyor's personal notes. This is documentary evidence. This is a window into how your grandfather understood the land. Dr. Chen spread the maps across her lab table. She used a magnifying glass to examine the small notations, the pencil marks, the symbols that indicated soil type, drainage, water table depth. As she studied them, she began to piece together a story that had been invisible for 70 years. Here's what the maps showed. In 1923, this farm had multiple tile drainage systems, underground pipes designed to move water away from the root zone. Your grandfather had been systematic about it. He'd drained 4 separate sections. Each one was documented on these maps. Each one had a date: 1921, 1920, 1922. Your grandfather was investing in the land, making it more productive. But when we look at modern records, satellite imagery, county drainage records, recent surveys, only one of those drainage systems remains. One. The other 3 had failed or been abandoned. And when that happens, when drainage fails, the water table rises, the soil becomes waterlogged, air can't penetrate, roots can't develop, the soil that was once productive becomes marginal. Your grandfather's notes were precise. Native prairie soil, deep humus layer. That means the top layer of soil was rich with organic matter. Organic matter is the lifeblood of soil health. It holds water, it feeds microorganisms, it creates structure. That soil would have been incredibly productive. When we tested the current soil, we found pH 6.2, low organic matter, compacted subsoil. The soil hadn't died. It had been depleted, waterlogged, neglected. For decades, farmers in this area, including James's grandfather's successors, had worked the land harder and harder, extracting value instead of building value. And the soil had deteriorated in response. Dr. Chen speaks. This land didn't fail. The land was fine. What failed was the drainage system, and then the farming practices, and then the will to maintain what your grandfather had built. In 1923, American agriculture was at a turning point. This was the era of the Great Improvement. Farmers were mechanizing. They were installing drainage systems. They were becoming scientific about farming. Your grandfather was part of that movement. He understood that healthy soil was an investment, that a drained field was a productive field, that you had to work with the land, not against it. But then the world changed. The Depression came, then the Second World War, then the interstate highway system, then industrial agriculture, then chemical fertilizers and monoculture. Farming became about extraction, maximum yield per acre, economies of scale. Nobody had time to maintain a great-grandfather's tile drainage system. Nobody thought about soil health in terms of generational investment. You farmed hard, you harvested, you moved on. Across the Midwest, thousands of farms experienced this same pattern. Smaller operations were consolidated. Traditional practices were abandoned. Soil health was sacrificed for short-term yield. And what you were left with in places like this were acres and acres of farmland that looked and tested as marginal. But it wasn't. It was just neglected. So, what do these maps actually reveal? 4 different truths about this land and about American agriculture. First, soil management is generational. Your grandfather didn't just farm this land, he improved it. He built systems designed to last. The maps prove it, and modern soil science confirms it. If those drainage systems were restored, if crop rotation practices were reintroduced, if the soil was allowed to rebuild its organic matter content, this land could be incredibly productive again. Not in 1 year, not in 5 years, but over a decade, absolutely. This isn't dead soil. This is sleeping soil. We're seeing the same pattern everywhere. Farmers who dismissed their grandfather's practices as old-fashioned. But those practices were built on soil science that predates the chemical revolution, and they worked. Second, knowledge is preserved in strange places. Your grandfather's handwriting on these maps is his voice. It's him speaking to you, 70 years later, about what he understood, about what he valued, about what he wanted the next generation to know. He didn't write a manual. He didn't pass down family wisdom. He just annotated his maps and left them in the barn, betting that someone would eventually care enough to find them. James spent 50 years not knowing his grandfather was a careful student of his own land, a meticulous documenter, a problem solver, an investor in the future. All of that was visible in these maps. All of that was waiting to be discovered. Third, individual farm stories are regional stories. This one property didn't become marginal in isolation. It became marginal because the entire region experienced agricultural consolidation. When you look at county records, when you see how many small farms disappeared between 1950 and 1980, when you track the rise of industrial monoculture, when you map the abandonment of traditional practices, this farm story becomes a microcosm. It's not unique, it's representative. It's what happened to thousands of farms across the American heartland. Understanding this one farm helps you understand what happened to agriculture. And understanding what happened helps you imagine what could happen next. What could be recovered? What could be restored? Fourth, these maps are disappearing. USGS surveys from the 1920s are becoming rare. Families discard them. Archives don't prioritize them, but they're primary sources, they're evidence. They document exactly how farmers understood and worked their land at a specific moment in history. They show the technology available, the knowledge deployed, the care invested. Someone walked this property in 1923. Someone measured it. Someone documented it. Someone, James's grandfather, annotated it. That work is preserved here. It's a gift across time. It's a message from the past to anyone willing to listen. When Eleanor and I looked at those maps together after Dr. Chen explained what we were seeing, we both realized something. Everyone, the bank, the appraisers, the neighbors, the real estate agents, they were all wrong. Not maliciously. They were using the right tools, measuring the right things, but they were measuring the present without understanding the past. And without understanding the past, They couldn't read the land's actual potential. They made a decision that everyone who'd looked at this property would have called foolish. They decided to buy it. Eleanor secured financing, not from a bank, but from a private investor who understood what they were trying to do. They bought 160 acres of worthless scrub for $8,000 an acre. A total investment that was significant but manageable. And they made a promise to themselves. They would prove the experts wrong. The first thing they did was restore the original drainage systems. They hired a drainage specialist, the kind of farmer who still understood how tile drainage worked, who could read the old maps and understand the original intent. Working from your grandfather's 1923 maps, they located the abandoned tile lines. They dug up sections of the original drainage. And they began the work of repair. The second thing they did was take soil samples. Detailed soil testing. Not just from the surface, but from various depths. They had the samples analysed for organic matter content, compaction, pH, microbial activity, nutrient levels. The baseline was poor, but not hopeless. What we found was that the soil structure could be rebuilt, the compaction could be broken, the organic matter could be increased, the microbiome could be restored. All of it would take time, years, not months. But it was possible. The third thing they did was plan crop rotation. Using your grandfather's notes as a template, they developed a modern crop rotation plan. Clover in the north section to build nitrogen, oats in the east section for structure, corn in the south, and they left portions to rest, to rebuild. Every decision was based on what your grandfather had learned, what the maps documented, what the land itself was telling them. Year 1 was educational, Year 2 showed improvement. By Year 3, the soil organic matter had increased measurably. The compaction was breaking up. The microbial activity was recovering. And Eleanor was beginning to understand something that your grandfather had always known. Farming is a conversation with the land. And if you know how to listen, if you understand the history, if you read the maps, if you pay attention to the subtle signals, the land will tell you what it needs. By Year 4, something unexpected happened. Word spread, not through agricultural journals or academic circles, through the community. Neighbours began noticing the changes. They drove past and saw something different. A farm that wasn't just extracting value, but building it. A farm where somebody cared about the soil the way farmers used to care. A farm being managed like an investment in the future, not a mining operation. A local newspaper did a feature. Local woman restores abandoned farmland using 100-year-old maps. The story went viral on agricultural, social media. Farmers began sharing it with their families. Some older farmers looked at it and got emotional. They remembered when farming was like that, when you worked with the land, not against it. When you thought in terms of generations, not quarterly returns. More importantly, other farmers started digging through their own barns. They found old maps, they found old journals, they found their own grandfather's notes, and they began asking questions. If Eleanor could restore this land using a 100-year-old blueprint, what could they do? If the old knowledge was still valuable, still relevant, still practical, maybe they'd been wrong about it all along. This is where the story stops being about one farm and starts being about a pattern. Across the Midwest, there are thousands of acres classified as marginal farmland, written off, valued at minimal prices, considered not worth the investment. Most of them have been farmed for 100 years or more. Every single one has a history. Every single one probably has old maps, old documents, and old knowledge buried somewhere. What Eleanor and James did was recover institutional knowledge. Knowledge that had been lost but wasn't forgotten. It was preserved. In maps, in journals, in the land itself if you know how to read it. And if we could do this systematically, if we could recover the maps, decode the history, understand what made these lands productive before, we could revalue millions of acres. I'm not saying every abandoned farm can be restored. Some have been damaged beyond practical recovery. Some are in the wrong location. But many? Many could be, if someone cared enough to look at the maps, if someone believed in the potential, if someone understood that the past wasn't just history, it was a blueprint for how to farm better, for how to work with the land, for how to build something that lasts. After Eleanor and James's story came out, the County Historical Society started a project. They began collecting old USGS survey maps from local families, scanning them, preserving them, and pairing them with modern satellite imagery, creating a digital archive of how the land has changed, how it's been farmed, what practices worked, what practices failed. It's become a resource for farmers trying to understand their own property's history. 7 years after Eleanor and James bought this worthless scrub, something remarkable has happened. The farm has transformed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but it has transformed. The crops are healthy. The soil is building back. The drainage systems that your grandfather installed in 1921 are working. Again, having been repaired and maintained based on the 1923 maps that documented them. It's not a showpiece farm. It's not even particularly high yielding compared to industrial operations, but it's profitable, it's sustainable, and most importantly, it's got a future. Eleanor lives in the farmhouse now. She works the land, she studies the soil, she keeps records just like your grandfather did, and when younger farmers or people curious about farming come to visit, she shows them the maps, she tells them the story. This is what knowledge looks like, she tells them. This is what happens when someone cares enough about land to really understand it. James has passed the maps to Eleanor now. They're getting professional preservation work. They're being stored in acid-free containers. They're being scanned at high resolution and archived digitally. But the originals stay visible in Eleanor's office. As a reminder, a daily conversation between past and future, between what was known and what's still being learned. When I was younger, I thought the old ways of farming were just old, outdated. My grandfather's generation had worked harder, with fewer tools, and accomplished less than modern farmers with their machinery and chemicals. I was wrong. He wasn't working harder. He was working smarter. He understood the soil in a way that took me 70 years to appreciate, and I almost missed it. If Eleanor hadn't asked questions, if I hadn't looked in that barn, if those maps had gotten thrown away like so many others, I would have gone to my grave never knowing that my grandfather was a genius. James visits the farm once a month. He walks the fields. He talks to Eleanor about what's changed, what's working, what still needs to be done, and every time he goes, he carries the maps with him. Not to show them anymore, but just to have them there, like a connection, a conversation across time that he's finally able to understand. I came into this thinking I was fixing a piece of land, but what I found was that I was actually reconstructing a relationship. A relationship between humans and Earth that had been interrupted, but not broken. The maps showed me that my great-great-grandfather, whom I never knew, was trying to tell me something. Here's how to care for this. Here's what I learned. Here's what I want you to know. And for 7 years I've been reading that message, and the land has been reading it with me. Eleanor now teaches agricultural history at a community college. She uses maps. She uses documents. She teaches farmers and students how to read their own land's past, how to decode old documents, how to understand what their own property is trying to tell them. It's become more than just farming. It's become research, education, preservation. This story matters because it's not unique, it's happening everywhere. And we're losing the maps, we're losing the knowledge. Families are throwing them away, archives are overwhelmed, and the generational knowledge, that could help us farm differently, more sustainably, more thoughtfully. It's just disappearing. Eleanor and James's story is important because it shows what becomes possible when someone stops and asks, "What did my ancestors know that I've forgotten?" That question, combined with the evidence, the maps, the documents, the land itself. That's how you recover knowledge. That's how you rebuild practices. That's how you change the future. This is what the hidden farmer is about, not just preserving the vintage iron that refused to die, the tractors and harvesters and threshers that people collect and restore. but preserving the knowledge that refused to be forgotten, the knowledge that's hidden under barns, the knowledge that's written in margins of old maps, the knowledge that's encoded in the land itself, if you know how to read it. Our agricultural heritage isn't just in machines. It's in the understanding that was accumulated over generations. It's in the relationship between people and earth that took centuries to develop. And somewhere in the last 50 years, we decided that all of that was obsolete, that modern science had replaced it, that we didn't need to understand the past because the future was better. But the future brought erosion. It brought soil degradation. It brought chemical runoff and compacted earth and monoculture vulnerability. And now, as we're waking up to the consequences of that approach, we're discovering that the past actually had answers. Solutions. Practices that worked because they were built on deep understanding rather than quick profit. The 1923 survey maps of that one farm in the Midwest are just one example. But there are thousands of similar examples hidden in barns and attics and county archives across America. Maps from the 1920s, journals from the 1930s, account books from the 1940s. Photographs that document how farming was done, how land was valued, how knowledge was preserved. Most of it is being lost, but some of it is being found. And every time it's found, every time it's studied, every time it's applied, we recover something precious. We recover the possibility of a different future. If you're watching this, there's a possibility that you have something like this in your own family. Old maps, faded documents, agricultural records from your grandfather or your great-grandfather, journal entries about planting times and harvest results, photographs of farm life from a century ago. Most families don't know what to do with these things. They seem too old, too fragile, too obscure to matter. But they matter. They're evidence. They're knowledge. They're bridges between the past and the future. We'd love to hear your stories. If you have old maps, documents, photographs, or family farming history, share it with us. Tell us what you've found. Tell us what your family knew. Tell us what you've learned about your own land's history. Because this work, the work of recovering, preserving, and understanding our agricultural heritage, doesn't happen in universities or government agencies. It happens in families. It happens in barns. It happens when someone asks a question and follows it back through time to find the answer. The land has always been trying to tell its story. Every field, every farm, every acre of American soil. And beneath the paved roads and the high-tech dealerships beyond the industrial agriculture that dominates the headlines, there are people still listening to that story. People who understand that a 100-year-old blueprint still has value. That a piece of marginal farmland can be restored to productivity. That the future of agriculture might actually be written in the past. That's what The Hidden Farmer is about. Thank you for listening.